Let's go. Thank you. All right, you guys, let's get after it. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. How are our levels? Can you hear me okay in the back? A little bit? No. We're gonna have to use the mic, that's fine.
You're gonna have to project.
No, I'm recovering from a cold, so someone told me once if you have a mic, use it. So that's what we'll do. I'm gonna do introductions. I promised myself I won't do like the whole long alumni spiel, like, start talking about everything I did as a student, and we're gonna keep things, kind of relevant. I'll put up my contact information at the end. Definitely looking forward to connecting if anyone has any any questions. That's amazing. So without further ado, let's get after it. It's a full room. I love it. I love it. Let's go. This is my first presentation. You have to be patient with us. Mine and Latisha. So here we go. Got some seats up here in the front too. So a professor once told me, always start with your why, right? It's also famous from Simon Sinek, if anyone knows about that. Start with your why, always. So I have often reflected on my upbringing in the low end of North Minneapolis as a Black American Muslim male, on how my Umi was a G when she was Dolo. For context, that's, she's single. But for context, for location, we stayed off Emerson. That's across the street from North High School when I was like wee ages. And then we stayed on Morgan Avenue, which is across the street from Fourth Precinct. And that's where, the infamous Jamar Clark, everyone was protesting, camped out. You can literally see Fourth Precinct from out our window. So that's where I stayed growing up. Naturally, through my observations, I noticed we stem from a matriarchal family, and thus I have always been a strong supporter of women out of necessity. It was during my Women in Politics class last spring where Professor Birkenpass exposed me to the feminist movement. How you doing, Taylor? And challenged my thinking process in our hierarchical, dominated society. During this course, I wrote a paper titled The Welfare Queen, A Case for Economic Development. In lieu of this year's Pan-African Conference theme, vindicating the suffering of our ancestors and earning the respect of future generations, I am motivated to learn how I and others can support Black American women, women of color, and women economically, physically, and socially. And, what does this support look like within our community? So if you read the abstract, I have to apologize. There's a lot of big words in there, and if I could redo it, I would, to simplify, because I think the title better explains what our presentation is about. And so I just want to throw that out there, off top. But without further ado, Latisha, please introduce yourself.
Trying to see if I need it. Yeah, okay, I need a mic. Okay, my name is Latisha. I'm the president of Black Motivated Women here on campus. My why, I guess, I would consider myself a feminist. I do a lot of work with Black women here on campus. I come from a single mother household, so I have no choice but to care about women's issues. And I do define myself as a Black feminist because I do think that a lot of the feminist movements don't involve Black women. So when you hear feminist, I want you to keep in mind that for me, feminist means respecting and encouraging women, not hating and resenting men. So going forward today, you'll hear me talk a lot about our topics about poverty, sexual assault, transgenerational trauma, all of these things related to Black women. But just keep in mind that the purpose here is to figure out how we can move forward. So that's why I'm here to work with my homeboy, Abdul.
Claps are welcome. No, seriously, give you guys yourself a round of applause for coming through. We really do appreciate it. It's a full room. This is gonna be a dope session. And so you heard our whys, and let's dive in. But we gotta do a heat check. This is a call and response type session. Going to be interactive. There's going to be questions. You're going to have to engage with your colleagues and people at your table. We may even mix it up. But I love how the room is situated now. So on a scale of 1 to 10, how comfortable are we in having an uncomfortable conversation? 10. I hear some 10. Shout them out. All right, another 10. A couple people quiet. That's on the low end of the scale. I hear some numbers though. How comfortable are we?
10.
I hear some more 10s. 9, 10. What about this area right here? Where we at? 10, 9. That sounds like we're ready, to test the waters here, and really get into some deep conversation. So let's lay some ground rules. We got the pronouns earlier. Please be respectful of people when they are making recommendations, suggestions, feedback. Also, if you can, present from a local immediate, I forgot the terminology, local immediate person. So if you say you have a suggestion, say, if it's personal, say I feel this is for me, And so if you can add context, I said from the beginning, as an African American male, this is how I felt. If you can add context, that's how you present a statement so it's not offensive to others and you're not imposing your opinion on others. All right, so those are kind of ground rules we're gonna have for small group conversation, large group conversation. But we are gonna interact with each other, all right? I heard some 10s, so, all right.
Are there any high schoolers in here? Any high schoolers? Just 2? Okay. 3? Is this your first conference here? Okay.
So we're gonna start with the definition of transgenerational trauma. We got it up there on the board. Transgenerational trauma is trauma that is transferred from first gen of trauma of survivors and on to the next generation. There's even science behind it. It's called epigenetics that pretty much suggests that if something of traumatic experience happens to you, your DNA can be restructured and that DNA sequence is passed on to your offspring. So there's science to back up what this is, but this is a coined term that a lot of researchers have used to present, again, the trauma that is transferred from the first generation of trauma survivors onto the next generation. So now that we've defined it, let's talk about how this has affected the Pan-African community and the relevance to today. So to really grasp the root of poverty and its offspring, I wrote a paper in that class that I mentioned, delving into the depth of trauma associated with African American women, which dates back to slavery. One stressor all women face is their physical vulnerability. This stressor is found to be significantly higher among women in poverty due to their heightened unsafe, thanks for joining us up here, appreciate you, due to their heightened unsafe environment provoking sexual assault and violence.
Okay, so going forward to the poverty discussion and sexual assault, this article called Surviving the Struggle, this article titled Surviving the Struggle, Poverty, Sexual Assault, and Mental Health Outcomes of African Americans. It has some perspectives that we don't like to talk about, but census shows that 40% of the U.S. homeless population is made up of women. 25.6% of African American women are living in poverty, and that's the highest of all ethnic groups. So this article talks a lot about how women in poverty are more vulnerable to sexual assault and how it is still a condition that is being a chronic condition among women in the United States. So it talks about how, so African American women living in low income housing are more vulnerable to sexual assault because they are more likely to be living in areas with high rates of violence and substance abuse. So the fact that Black women are still dealing with these issues that date back to slavery, and that goes back to what he said about transgenerational trauma, which again is historical trauma that dates down from generations. So the fact that this is still an issue, it just shows that this counters the idea that Black women are unrapeable. So in this article, she talks about how women of color are more likely to experience this level of abuse and also these oppressional stressors.
So, it's a rhetorical one, but what is the appropriate remedy? We want to start thinking about that as we relate to the Me Too movement and things that are going on about that. Like, how can we have a solution-oriented conversation? And that's the purpose of this presentation and this dialogue. We want to have a solution-oriented conversation. So think about that. What is the appropriate remedy? Now, however, we are talking about a very targeted population and demographic, but of course, sexual assault and these variables go across borders, right? So pay attention to that. Let's think about what are some remedies, what can we offer as suggestions. And I know there's more women in this room than men, which is good, but it's a challenge, because I will get into it later, but I have a different perspective on how we can potentially be engaged in the conversation. So, the next transgenerational trauma we're going to talk about is lynchings. So the lynch law in America was coined by Ida B. Wells, a strong proponent against lynching, right? She discusses the origins and defines the unwritten law associated with lynchings in America. According to her research, the unwritten law justified lynchings putting human beings to death without complaint under oath, without trial by jury, without opportunity to make defense, and without right of appeal. The unwritten law was used to justify any means to resist Negro domination, a cry of defamation to new black citizens looking to vote. Advocates of the unwritten law and lynchings were the red dirt bands of Louisiana, South Carolina, and other states, which were succeeded by the Ku Klux Klans. These groups boldly avowed their purpose to intimidate, suppress, and nullify Negroes' right to vote. Thus, lynchings began in the South and rapidly spread until the unwritten law reigned supreme. Some men were taken from their homes, beaten, and exiled. Others were assassinated when their political prominence made them obnoxious to their political opponents. It was said that thousands of colored voters were butchered. Later, Maggie Anderson also states in her book, Our Black Year, she highlighted Ida B. Wells' research stating, that during the age of massive lynchings of blacks, the largest number of black men lynched were those of business people who competed with whites. Not those facing the already highly suspicious charges of raping white women. This is one method of transgenerational trauma where black men have been removed from black families and the community. Others include prison, police brutality, and substance abuse. It is beyond the scope of this presentation to further examine in detail each of these subtopics. But I intentionally sat in that moment so we can get to understand that, just a little bit. What's important to note about these assaults is that they're still prevalent. We're still seeing these today in many different forms. So let's take another look at poverty. Poverty and health.
Okay, are you guys familiar with Angela Rye, the CNN commentator, black woman? She's always arguing on CNN. Yes? No, I'm not seeing no head. Yes? Yes, I know this. So do you know her podcast, On One? She basically rants on there and does a lot of conversations about black women. She has one called Black Women Leading the Revolution. So there's a quote from it where she says, if America has a cold, the black community gets the flu. If the black community gets the flu, then the black woman gets pneumonia. So I want to ask you guys, how would you interpret that statement?
Yes.
When any type of severe economic crisis happens in America, it affects the black or broke communities the most.
Oh, good. That's what I was doing.
Absolutely.
Okay, I thought that was gonna be a little harder for me. But so then going forward, it talks about, this article talks about how black women are the most likely to have mental health issues, but also the least likely to have the means to get it taken care of. So the word I really want you to pay attention to is to have the means. So it's not like we have them and we're not seeking help. We don't have the means to seek help for these mental problems. So again, that's another factor in poverty as well.
I feel like a preacher right now. Sweating on. So when we have solution-oriented conversations, many people insist on bringing up, issues to policymakers, right? The passage of the Affordable Care Act was substantive legislation geared at women's issues and intended to improve the health of black women in poverty. The article, the Affordable Care Act, and its potential to improve the health of African American women considers the viability of the legislation to serve as a tool to help address the health needs of African American women. Health matters are an interest of women in poverty, but the Affordable Care Act is not a solution to poverty. It merely enhances the accessibility of affordable health care, but does not reduce the barriers associated with poverty. For example, transportation to health clinics, healthier food options, and better schools. The Affordable Care Act, as we all know, is no longer the presiding law, and it was only a short-term solution. So let's look at another variable. Let's look at the wage gap.
Okay, so the information we found on the wage gap is that black women are having trouble competing on all education levels. Even black women with bachelor's degrees are still making less than the white non-Hispanic male. So black women would have to get a master's degree in order to actually compete, and studies show that a black woman with a master's degree or any type of graduate degree makes about $56,000 in comparison to the white man who makes $54,000. So the earliest records we could find for the wage gap was 1967, and at that time, black women were making about 43 cents to every dollar that a white non-Hispanic male was making. And the closest we could find till now is 2015, where the wage gap has narrowed by 20 cents, so black women are now making 63 cents to every dollar that a white male was making. And studies show that older black women have a wider wage gap than younger black women. And what was the information you found about retail jobs? Black women are more likely to work in fast food, retail,
Yep.
so lower quality jobs.
Black women only make up 6% of the workforce, 6 point some change.
Mm-hmm.
They make up 10% of the low-end wage jobs, retail, fast food, and they only make up 2.7% of the professional scientists, graduate degrees, accountants type jobs.
But even still, we have to get master's degrees to actually compete on the same level as white males. So I think that's interesting. Even just having a bachelor's degree is making it harder for us to compete, and we're still making less. So that's an interesting thing to pay attention to as well.
Yeah, this graph highlights that. It's an image to point out. She said, the earliest information we have is back to 1967, up to 2015. My line's a little off. Up to 2015, but we're right around that 60% threshold, and it hasn't been broken through. So that's over decades. That's a long time. We got another image though. Let me really make this clear. This is the United States. Resemblance. In graphic, it highlights areas where a 2-bedroom at market rate apartment, how many hours you have to work in a week to afford that. We're not talking about Section 8, we're not talking about affordable housing, we're talking about at market rate, right? There's nowhere in the country where that's capable of doing within a 40-hour work week. Even here in our lovely Minnesota, still about 60 to 70 hours. So let's do a heat check. How are we doing at seeing the correlation between poverty and transgenerational traumas? We warm, we cold, is the picture coming together? How's the big picture coming together right now? You say hot, cold, I'm far, I'm in Iceland, Greenland.
Well, income has to do a lot with where you live and what school district you get into. So like it starts from the bottom of not being able to make enough money so my kids can go to a good school all the way up to an institutional level. I can't afford for my kids to go to this school, this and that. And even sometimes like your economic status, like socioeconomic status will hold you back from going to the university you want to go to because you won't always have a full ride scholarship just because you have good grades and a high ACT score. So I think like transgenerationally, being in poverty holds Black people down from even getting those degrees that we now need because the bachelor's is now the new associates. We have to work twice as hard to get half as far, is what my mom always told me. We have to, in the back of our heads, know as Black people that we, in order to be afforded the same opportunities, we always have to do X amount more, this and that, because we were set back from the beginning. You have to remember that Black people were held down for several decades from having generational wealth. What you take for granted as your family always had a basis of money, we did not have that because we were not allowed to come to America with $12 in our pocket and open a store a couple years later. Our ancestors were sold for $12. So I just like to point that out as to why this whole idea of transgenerational trauma can affect Black people even in 2018. So you can't say, so it was slavery 300 years ago. It still affects us to this day. Did anyone else want to share a correlation they noticed in the information?
Thank you, Taylor. She always going off. I had class with her. Thank you again. I love it. What I heard from that was, short term summarize all that was upward mobility has been a significant challenge due to these transgenerational traumas and consistent variables of poverty. All right. Let's take a look at how this is relevant to the Me Too movement. My internet connection is busted. Can someone? Yeah. Can you? No, I don't need to just need Wi-Fi. Yeah.
Do you guys know about the Me Too movement?
Sorry, technical difficulties. This was ready to go.
You know who started the Me Too movement? No, you don't. Black women started this Black woman in the middle started the Me Too movement. She started in 2006, and it didn't get any attention until recently when a white woman brought attention to the movement. But it's been a movement for quite some time, focused on mostly minority women who are victims of sexual assault. So, good, okay.
You said that was 6 years? When did you say that was?
2006. So it's been around about 12 years.
If anyone hasn't seen this, it's a powerful documentary series going on about the Me Too movement. highly
Not
recommend
just for the men
everyone
choose,
go
but
watch
I
this.
want
You know,
the
if you
men
haven't
choose.
already, it just came
But
out.
when I raise
Super,
my
super
hand,
relevant. It's
I'm
I think
aware
last Sunday it got
of
released.
Loves enduring horrible sexual jokes. When she wrote the letter, other women joined her. In a year and a half, she got only 2 jobs, and she is really having a hard.
Can you give us a title?
Me Too movement.
Gender inequity and
It's Me Too Now What?
only
Yeah,
2
I'm sorry.
jobs. And
This
she's
Me Too Now
really
What?
having
This
a
is the
hard time
Reckoning.
actually earning a
I think
living.
the 105
that's
series
the reason why all these issues of structural
of PBS.
Her people commenting on her breasts. See jokes. When she wrote the letter, other women joined her. In a year and a half, she got only 2 jobs, and she's.
Oh man, this is she speaking it right now. This is the clip. I want y'all to hear her. I don't know why it's acting goofy.
I was just wondering, I have a question.
Yes.
You said it started in 2006, and I was just wondering, do white women feel a kinship to African American women? We're talking about sexual assault, or is that something it only takes off, or when it's white women who have come together and said that we're no longer going to accept this? Because you said it started in 2006. It's 12 years later, and it's taken off when white women. Oh.
You're asking from my perspective.
Well, anyone, I guess all of our perspective. I'm just asking, throwing the question out there, and you can be sure to give you your perspective. Yeah.
Can you ask the question again though?
Yeah.
First?
Oh.
Because everybody-
I was just wondering, you know, does the white women feel a kinship to the African American woman? When it started in 2006, it didn't really take off until
There's a structural
white women started getting together and started speaking about this. But it's been, if the program, Me Too started 12 years ago, all of a sudden it's got legs and feet to it when white women started to speak up and speak out. So I just wondered, do they feel there's a kinship, a sisterhood in the sense?
Does anyone else want to answer that before we jump into it?
Historically speaking, no. Typically what happens with movements when non-white people start them is that there tends to do the groundwork and the grassroots efforts usually tend to get a little more attention when we're building things up. But typically what happens is a lot of federal grants get sent to these movements, and a lot of different forms of currency and money get generated, and then you see the participation of those members of the dominant society. But that's not to negate the fact that, you know, there are certain people that do relate to the root cause of a movement like Me Too or a movement like Black Lives, whatever it may be. But typically and historically speaking, and you can do the research yourselves, even contemporarily in America, there seems to always have to be what's what I'm looking for? A profit, even if it's not just monetarily, but there has to be a benefit for people to get into it or back it up.
Does anyone want to counter that before she?
Yeah, I wanted to. Oh, yeah.
Look at that.
Forgive me, I don't want men speaking on behalf of women. We're talking about women issues, and if there are.
Excuse the mic.
My bad. Once again, I don't want men to be speaking about women issue when there are women in the room. If we could get 1 or 2 women to respond to the issue of kinship, sisterhood, when it comes to sexual harassment.
He does make a good point, though. I do want to know.
Oh, yeah, he was correct, but I'm saying, once again,
So what I heard from my mans was that there's been a disconnect between African American women and other women, white women, historically, because there's either got to be an additional motive or agenda involved. And from his point specifically, I heard those related to monetary. That's what I heard. I will definitely love to hear from women in the room on their take. And this is a great starting point where we're going to table the conversation and return to after watching this clip quickly.
In the heart.
And that's one of the reason why all these issues of structural discrimination and related, because if you don't have the economic security, you are much more vulnerable to all kinds of abuse, including sexual harassment, but other kinds of abuse as well.
Have you been in positions where you endure?
Just that little bit. There's a lot of work to get that 2-second soundbite. I apologize for the technical difficulties. I actually wrote it down. We weren't planning on using it, but I thought it would be more powerful, again, coming from the woman's perspective and coming directly from her. But what she states is that, you know, they're all interrelated, because if you don't have the economic security, you are much more vulnerable to all kinds of abuse, including sexual harassment. So that was us tying in all these different points we were making before to tie in the conversation, the relevance to the Me Too movement. And you guys brought up an excellent point about, is there kinship? I wrote this down, kinship among women in the movement. Is there a disconnect? We heard one example already. And so I think this is excellent to hop into discussion. We're kind of bouncing around, and that's okay. And we do want to be cognizant of time. And so we kind of already did a little bit of discussion. We're going to return to the discussion, but we're going to adjust accordingly, okay? So we're going to do, at your table, first question is, how can we men support women within the Pan-African community to excel socially, economically, and physically? And that's, you know, I understand there's white women, there's women of color, and there's Black American women, there's African women. You know, there's different origins of women, ethnicities of women, excuse me, and that's okay. That's okay. We're here to mastermind together on these issues, and everyone is entitled to their opinion. So let's brainstorm in small group conversations, and let's see what we can, you know, create together, conjure. That's the first question. Now, I know this is tailored for men. This is not tailored for men. This question is, how do we get men? Because that's the whole point of this conversation. I want to know how we as men can support and be involved in this movement and support women. So I will repeat the question again. How can we men support women within the Pan-African community to excel socially, economically, and physically?
We can go ahead and use groups at your tables and discuss that.
All right, question. Okay, okay. That's fine. We're gonna go ahead and go to the next question. We're gonna go to the next question. We're returning actually to the question brought up earlier by the gentleman. And what does kinship among women look like in the Me Too movement? I think that's a critical question. Thank you for raising that, and that's something we're going to ask for question 2. Now, everyone again can continue discussing, and we're going to bring it back into a large group where we can get some feedback from everyone. So if you can write these down, however you want to remember them. But that's question 2. So keep digging.
Anything will get baseline. They're kind of on the edge and say, give a compliment or do something that is more forthright. Just as, looking at kinship, you also probably look at an example, like just an introduction. That's but I think there is a kinship there. I think it's kind of like a little. A lot of times, like guys probably have to recognize that they're not, all in each other's face.
How do you feel?
That's okay too. That there's differences, and that's all right.
Just give me about 20 more seconds. Okay, so we're going to bring it back into big group discussion.
As soon as I had a point.
All right, let's bring it back into big group discussion, please. So let's jump back into the kinship question. Okay. Let's talk about the kinship question. I really want responses from women because we did hear from 2 males, but I do want to hear from women. Do you feel like, to readdress this question, the reason that, he said that white women did not jump to support the Me Too movement when it was just minorities because they were expecting some type of monetary benefits. But other than that, do you feel that there is a kinship among, white women and minorities? in this Me Too movement? Go ahead, Taylor. Come on.
Oh, well, hi, I'm Taylor. But I feel like our table is more saying yes and no, because if you think about it, it was started in 2006 by a minority woman concerning minority women, and the reason why we had to have a movement saying Me Too is because minority women are less likely to be believed by peers, by people they work with, by police, by paramedics. They're less likely to even be believed by their doctors that something terrible happened to them, that they're in pain, that they've been attacked, that they've been raped. Less so than the white woman who can just say, this black man raped me, and you're believed and he's pulled out of his school and he's expelled. So you can just pretend that something happened, but we have to scream with all of these voices to say that something happened to us. So I believe that there is a kinship between minority women and the connection that we are currently trying to make, that we've seen the transition in the media, the transition to being believed by overwhelming society, because white women are now raising their voices, because again, whether we like it or not, they are the more trusted, more credible voice in society, as opposed to the minority woman, and especially the black woman, because historically black women are viewed as hypersexual. That's why we are not believed when we say we've been raped. How do you know you didn't want it? You are black. So I just like to point that out. The Me Too movement creates this kinship between not only minority women, but white women who helped to lend credibility to the voice that we have raised with this minority voice.
I saw another hand over here. Does somebody want to add on to that? No? Okay, let's go on to the second question that you discussed within your group.
One more? Can we get one more? We gotta get
Go
one
ahead,
more.
run ahead after. No? Yeah.
I love it.
Okay.
Anywhere else. Somebody. I know this is that opportunity where you got the bubble guts. You had something to say. You just like, you want to get it out.
Okay.
Okay.
The second question.
Oh yeah, we're going back to the discussion. So for large group, we want to hear back from the first question. How can men be involved? How can we get engaged? What are some of you guys' responses? I'd love to hear back from you guys. Anybody, I got two people here, definitely. I'm gonna start here, and I got you.
Hi, I'm Ashley. So like my group, we talked about like how men should like talk more to other men to get the word out, and then we talked about like how like we gotta like stop viewing women as like sex objects and like view them more as like humans, and then talk about like amplifying the voice for women as well.
Well, we just discussed about motivating our women, helping them follow their dreams and goals and aspirations in life, and just being that foundation that they can use us to rely on to help them grow and elevate in today's society, because there is a gap between black women and white women, like it was stated. So helping all women would be great, but we need to help the vulnerable as well. So just elevating our women and encouraging them, motivating them, loving them, and encouraging them to be all they can be, and in return, that will help us be all that we can be.
Y'all got any examples? I want that. You have any examples? Two more? All right, two quickly, okay? We wanna be respectful of everyone's time here.
Alright, so what I have to say is kind of a follow-up of what this brother over here was saying. So to give an example of what he was talking about, my theory of how men can help women is through music. And music has, especially in the black community, music has done a lot, whether it be healing or even for the negative music, whether it be destroying. But music is a very powerful tool, and if used correctly, it can be used to heal. Now, back to the example that I was going to say, what Tupac Shakur, one of his songs is called Dear Mama. He's talking about uplifting his mother, despite all the trials and tribulations that they've had growing up, and respect, and like that kind of message alone will help and uplift women. There, I forget the guy's name, but there's actually a scientist who actually studied, to keep this brief, actually it's a scientist that studied the harmonics of music and how it actually affects people. It bypasses all of the defenses of the brain and has you actually acting out what you are hearing. Yeah, something like that. But one more thing. But and you could attest to this on a daily basis. If you are walking down the street, for example, that's the example that I gave earlier, and a car goes by and is playing some particular song. 5 or 10 minutes later, you're singing that song and you don't even realize why. And now you know it's because the music has actually bypassed all the defenses of your brain, and it makes you actually act it out, if not sing it, whether you're singing it out loud or singing it in your head. So.
We really appreciate that. Harmonic rhythm. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Hi, my name is Emmanuel. What me and my group talked about was actually gender inequality. And if you check it out right now in our society, we have a high rate of gender inequality because if you check the occupation, the careers that we're going into, most of the time we always refer to everything as he first. We have everyone saying the policeman. We have everyone saying the pilot. You don't hear anything concerning a woman. You don't put a female first or anything like that. Bringing it to the home, most of us here from African homes, you could tell that if you go home and your dad is hungry or something, even if there's a food in the fridge, he's gonna tell your mama, hey, I'm hungry. And what happens? Even if she's doing something, maybe she's on a book she's reading, she gets up from that book and she attends to him. Women tend to have two kinds of life. Men tend to have one kind of life. You leave your job, you go home, and what you do, your wife gives you food and you go to bed, you're good. But women are done with jobs and they come back home and they still have a second life, attending to the kids, and attending to the husband, and attending to whatnot. They say charity begins at home. If you want to stop that, you have to start it from your house.
Thank you. I love the feedback. Unfortunately, we are at time, and I would love to dive into more of that conversation. We were talking about societal norms, even the feminist movement, they talk about traditional norms in the household. That's dope. Talking about how music can be another source to remedy and help heal women, as men. How we can assist. I heard also supporting, talk to other men, advocacy and support. So a lot of feedback, and then of course, I also noted what women provided and suggested about how we can increase kinship, and at least I heard a little bit more about the disconnect. I intentionally wanted to originally bring the conversation back to what I thought would be potentially a solution in economic development, something Obama also suggested, which was through entrepreneurship. But I know we're at time. I've adjusted. I've cut it all out. There's a lot of material. I was working hard. But hey, we had some really rich conversation, and I think thank you guys for coming. I thank you guys for participating. I hope that you guys were able to take something away from this experience and to continue learning from the conference. So thank you for your time. We're going to end promptly. Please fill out the surveys, and we're going to collect them. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.